Well, terrific to have such a great crowd here today. It's just wonderful, really, really very, very happy with that. I'm Dave Coleman, I'm Vice President of the Gunflint Trail Historical Society. I see we have some other officers and board members and volunteers. Raise your hand. And I'll say a few things about Bill. But the most important thing I'm going to say right now is that he has been for many years one of our most important, most steadfast volunteers at the Chik-Wauk Museum and Nature Center, and we need more Bills up here. He just does a fabulous, fabulous job. How long have you been doing it for?
Well, since 2007 or so, 8, somewhere around there.
You know, always helping out, and the guests really love to have him here as well. And I see some of our Clearwater Lake friends here, and that makes it special as well. I'm not going to do a long introduction because part of it is built into the presentation today. But I've known Bill for about 40 years. We live in a cabin on Clearwater Lake that was originally part of the Forest Lodge that he built. And as far as I can tell, he probably dug the hole that our original 50-gallon can septic system was in behind.
I think I did.
See? And so I've known Bill for a long time. Got to know his mom, and it's just a cherished part of the community. He'll tell you about growing up here, 2 different resorts in the area, attending the one-room schoolhouse which existed for a while on the site of the Clearwater Lodge, and going from there, and graduated from the high school in Cook County, and then went on to the Naval Academy, went on to the U.S. Naval Academy. I believe he was the first individual from Cook County in history that went from the high school on to one of the U.S. Service Academies. So that was huge.
There was one earlier one, but he went to West Point.
Went to West Point, well.
Yeah. That doesn't really count.
And then after that, Bill went on to a very long and very, very distinguished naval career, but never stopped coming up here, was always here, and then hand-built his present home, which is across the street and just a little bit west of us, the hilly part of the Clearwater Road. And he's up here for as long as humanly possible every summer, and we just love having him, and we love to hear his stories today. So Bill, it's yours.
Thank you. We also have in the audience Nancy Krataska and her daughter Karen, and so they can check to make sure when I'm talking about Trout Lake, I'm not exaggerating or overstating something else. No, she's taking notes. So this talk today is going to be primarily about my parents, Bill and Grace Boissenin. I need to have a cheat sheet going here. In the early 30s, Bill had gotten laid off from his job in Ottawa, Illinois, and after a year or so, he became a member of the Warner Construction Company. At the time, was building a bridge across the Illinois River there by Ottawa. And he stayed working for a Warner Construction Company for several years, buying a trailer and living in the trailer at each of the construction sites. In the summer of 1938, Warner had finished building a bridge and dam across the, not a bridge, but a dam and spillway across the Mississippi, right near Dubuque, Iowa. And they had finished the project there at Dubuque, and so he said, this is a good opportunity to go on a fishing trip. So he went by Grace's parents, and they loved to fish and liked to eat, so they came along with him, and they, I guess I can say we, but headed on up north, and the intention was that they would go to Duluth and then along the North Shore to, at that time was Fort William, Port Arthur, now Thunder Bay in Canada, and then head west through Canada to International Falls and then come south and fish along the way. Well, I got to Grand Marais, it was kind of a foggy, rainy day, and they pulled into a gas station to get refueled, and Bill happened to ask the attendant where there's a good place they could park their trailer and fish. Well, they told him to go up to West Bearskin Lake, public landing at West Bearskin, you could park your trailer there, and then there was Clearwater Lodge, if you could rent a boat or whatever to go fishing. So they did, went there for about a week or so, came of course acquainted with Charlie Boissenin and Bill Needham on Charlie on Clearwater and Bill Needham on West Bearskin or Hungry Jack, depending on which direction you were coming into his place. After about a week, they had their fill of fish, and Grace's parents returned on back to Illinois to their farm because they had things to do there. But Bill and Grace stayed in Cook County. But what to do? They couldn't just sit there in West Bearskin Landing for the rest of their life. So they found a place down near Hedstrom's Lumber Company. Hedstrom's had a vacant cabin there that they had used for when they went to the remote lumber sites, and this was cabin was for the cooks. So they stayed there for a while and decided they found that Trout Lake, there was this property on Trout Lake on the south shore, right about in the middle, east and west on the lake, and they purchased it. So let's see. And this sort of gives you a feel for the general layout there. The lane coming in, there's an east and west road between the Gunflint Trail and Colville Road, and Trout Lake just happened to be about halfway between. And the road lane came up and this parking lot here. Now, all these weren't there at the time. But while they were at Hester's and living in this cook's cabin, and they had purchased this property, they decided that what they would do is bring the cook's cabin up to Trout Lake and use that as their home. This is where they moved it. So then, that wasn't enough, just having the cook's cabin. They had a trailer, they bought another trailer and used that to rent out to various people that were looking for a place to stay while they were going off fishing and all. And they could haul it around to different lakes, you know, in Cook County. They also, while they were still there in Hester's, they built a second cabin, disassembled it, and had it taken up to Trout Lake. And this became their first guest cabin. Now this cabin was big enough that it could hold 2 double beds. And they eventually, but it wasn't partitioned off, it was just 2 double beds. And then they bought a second cabin from Hedstrom's and had it brought up, and this turned out to be cabin number 2. Now, cabin number 2 was only big enough to hold 1 double bed. Now, why do I make a fuss about that? Well, it would seem that every time a party come in looking for a place to stay, if there was 4 or more, The only cabin that was open was a cabin that had one double bed in it, so they would stay. And of course, the reverse would happen too. So, but there wasn't, the resorts at that time, this is back in the 30s, usually didn't stay open in the wintertime. And Trout Lake was one of the resorts that didn't. So Bill had to find another job while he was, over the winter. Well, it just so happened that his former boss in the Warner Construction Company said, hey, we're going to build a dam across the Blue River in Colorado. You want to work there? He said, okay, got a job. So off we went, towing the trailer, and this place that they went to was about 8 miles or so north of Dillon, Colorado, which is now pretty much a resort area in itself, and about 8 miles south of a town called Kremlin, Colorado. And they brought their trailer up and parked it near Kremlin and proceeded to go through that winter of 38, 39, working on the dam. In the spring of 39, the local in Coloradoans got all upset about Warner Construction hauling all these people from all over the United States instead of hiring people there in Colorado. So they went on strike and caused a big commotion, and after about a week or so, the strike was resolved, but that sort of soured Bill on staying there in Colorado. So they came back and went up to Trout Lake to open it up again to get the resort going. Now, prior to, well, let's go to the next one. Keep this in mind. This gives you a picture of what those 3 cabins are our home, and then the cabin 1 and 2 look like from the parking area looking back. This is in the spring of the year, and I think this is Grace's father, but I'm not really sure about that. Okay, and of course, they had to cut ice out of the lake because the cabins, as well as their home, had ice boxes in them. An old concept. But you had to get the ice from somewhere, and it's right handy there in the lake. And we'll see a picture of them doing that here a little bit later. And the, let's see. Well, the ice house was constructed right in on the west side of the parking lot. And a year or so later, Grace's father came up and helped build a 3rd cabin. You remember that was on the west side of the parking lot. And this time they took into account the fact that they had all this problem about families coming in and not being able to rent the cabin. So they built big enough to hold 2 double beds and built partitions between the 2 bedrooms that started about a foot or so off the floor and ended about a foot or so below the ceiling. And they used that, they said that was because it gives some circulation of air when they had the wood stove burning to give them a little bit of heat. Again, they had kerosene lamps for lights, outdoor toilets, and the water was gotten from the lake. They did build one well that they could use, and it was one of these hand pumps. You go down there with your bucket and fill it up and take it back. pretty much everything that was done that they had to do was pretty much done by hand. There was labor-saving devices just weren't available at the time. So now the operation of the resort was done between Bill and Grace. They split up the effort. Bill acted primarily as the host and the recreation director. Of course, recreation that time consisted of going out and fishing. While Grace stayed back at the resort, took care of me and the cabins and that sort of thing. The fishing was done in spring and the fall in Trout Lake, where it had lake trout and rainbows in it. In the summer when it got, well, we considered it hot, and they would go to Northern Light Lake where they could get northern pike, and they could go to West Bearskin and get some walleye pike. Okay, now they had also built this a shed that was used to store their boats in the wintertime. Had a section set off as a linen closet where Grace could store her sheets and pillowcases and towels and all that sort of stuff. And also, there was a room for a workshop for Bill to maintain whatever he had to maintain. And also, that was where Grace's laundry was. Now, no electricity, so what they had for a washing machine was a motor-driven, gasoline-driven motor that would stir up the agitator in the washing machine. But there was no spin cycle. That didn't exist in this machine. So what Grace had to do was she had a starter fire in the stove, put a big copper pot on it, haul water from a little pond that was right near the shed, haul it up, put it in there, heat up the water, then take it from there into the washing machine. And she had 2 other tubs there. She washed the clothes, and then because there was no spin cycle, she would have to run the clothes through a wringer that would go from the washing machine into the one tub, the first tub, which was a rinse tub, which she would fill with water from the creek. And stir up where trying to get the soap and stuff out, and then run it through the wringer once again into the second tub, which was dry. That would collect the clothes, and then she would take it out on the clothesline and hang them up and dry.
Wow.
Kind of again, it was a lot of work, handwork done. Okay, let's see. In wintertime, Grace and Bill would go down south near Illinois and see if they could find a job. Sometimes it was at a coal mine, sometimes it was in Chicago suburb, subway, all sorts of different things that they came through. In the spring of 1942, they came back up to the operating resort. Now, this is 42, as you recall. Thankfully, we had World War II coming along, so rationing happened, and there wasn't the amount of people that could travel up to a resort. So what they did, Bill went back down to Illinois to work there. Well, Grace and I stayed at Trout Lake to operate the resort. And Grace went around to various farms on Maple Hill, which is just north of Grand Marais, and to look for a teenage girl that could help her. Well, she found a lady by the name of Dorothy Olson, and Dorothy had she had a number of siblings, but one of them was her daughter, was Helen Olson, who would come up with Dorothy from time to time at Trout Lake. And so it turned out she was about the same age as I was, so I had somebody that mother could foist off on. So in the fall of 1943, the resort was operating again, and Bill came back. And that fall of 1943, they decided that they would stay in Cook County all during the winter. Grace got a job with as a teacher at the Maple Hill Elementary School, while Bill worked for Hestrom's. Let's see. You can go ahead and hit again and see where, okay, this gives you a sort of feel. I only got this because it gives you a feel for what the lane looked like in those days. And if you've been there, Charlie, you know it's quite a bit improved since then. The bear is incidental and not really any meaning as far as I'm concerned. Now this happens to be George Krataska, Nancy's father. Let's go on to the next one. But this shows Bill in front of that third cabin that he built. Gives you a feel for the kind of rounded lumber that they used, as well as fish.
That's not incidental.
No, not incidental at all. Looking at it, they decided to stay, and we stayed in a cabin near Hector's again during those winter times. When now, let's see, Maple Hill School, it doesn't exist anymore. It's been torn down, but it was a two-story building. The top floor had 4 classrooms in it, only 2 of which were used. There was one of the classrooms that would take the grades 1 through 4. The teacher had those 4 grades. And then the other classroom had the grades 5 through 8, and that's the grade my mother taught. So let's see. Next, okay, this is a picture of Bill, of course, acting as a fishing guide. For the next one. Okay, this is my class at Maple Hill School. And this is probably, this person, that's Carl Brandt, and there's me, and then, let's see, Helen Olson is right here, I believe. And see, Chester Linskog, I think this is Chester. Chester Linskog, by the way, is the person who started up the world's greatest donut shop. So, right in let's see, 1945 or so, Grace and Bill would go down to Illinois, usually over Christmas holidays, and visit with their relatives and et cetera. And let's see, 1945, George Krataska and Charlotte decided to buy Trout Lake. Well, before Bill developed Forest Lodge, he had to get rid of Trout Lake Resort, couldn't operate the two of them. And so George and Krataska decided to take over. So that freed him up to proceed to develop Forest Lodge. It started in the fall of '45 to build a road into Forest Lodge because the Clearwater Road ended at Clearwater Lodge at the time. He hired Philip Hedstrom to help him with bring the machinery up that he could build the road. And at the same, after he got the road built, he built a cabin which was going to be used as a boat shed. As it turned out, that became, while he was getting ready to build a real lodge, which is why Forest Lodge got the name for that lodge attached. And then, of course, back to work for Hedstrom's. And then in the spring of the year, along comes George and Krataska and Charlotte and Nancy and their daughter Janet, towing this immense trailer. At least I thought it was immense at the time. They had, of course, all their household possessions on it, and they also picked up a 32-volt generator and 18 2-volt wet cell batteries that they could use to provide electric current at the resort. Bill purchased 55 2-volt wet cells and a generator for use at Forest Lodge, so we would have 110-volt DC at the time. He put the cabin, their main home, let's see, this is the family in 46, just before we moved up to, 45, excuse me, just before we moved up to Forest Lodge. Next one, let's see. Okay, this digress for a moment. This is Bill sawing, cutting chunks out of the lake. You can see the saw is about 4 feet long or so and got these immense teeth on it. He laid out a board along his cutting line that he wanted and just followed that board along. And then he would cut them into these chunks and then haul them out by hand naturally, and then slide them over or take them over to the ice house. Okay, next slide. And this is our home, was the boat shed, and now our home at Clearwater. And you can see it's built on the side of the hill. And so underneath the lake side of the resort is where Bill put the 52-volt wet cells. Now, as long as the wet cells were charged, they didn't have to have any heat to keep them getting frozen. The next, and of course now with Costa's down at Trout Lake and Bill and Grace up here when school was over, they began operating their resort. They finished making our home livable, and after they got that done, Bill hired a few other people and built 4 cabins at Forest Lodge. So then he got some people to help him, and following on Charlie Boissen's example, by putting boats in the outlying lakes, he would provide some versatility for the different opportunities for fish. Now, this picture happened to be taken in 46, and it's on the Canadian side of Mountain Lake, which is one of the places where you put boats. The other place was in Watab Road, and these were all border lakes at the time. And there was no boundary waters that you had to contend with. And also on West Pike and Caribou. Caribou had Northern Pike, Northern Pike, West Pike had Trout, and so did Mountain, and Watab and Road had Northern Pike. He also put a boat on West Bearskin, which is good for walleyes, and in Wampus Lake, which was good for sunfish, panfish, and that sort of thing, which gives everybody some versatility. Again, as they had at Trout Lake, they didn't have a telephone, but the Gunflint Trail Resort Owners Association had created a Gunflint Trail telephone system that was pretty much a do-it-yourself type operation. But it was hooked up to AT&T down in Grand Marais, so that people that had access to this telephone system had just regular normal service. The telephone organization, it was the party line, they could only have so many people on it. So initially, we didn't have any telephones there at Forest Lodge either. But Bill created what they call a bush line, which is one telephone line going from tree to tree between Forest Lodge and Clearwater Lodge, and also hooked up into Booster's cabin and a fella on the South Shore, Oscar Simon. Now, I thought he did something kind of unique to create this, and what would happen is somebody would call Clearwater Lodge answer it, and then they would dial up us on the bush line and tell us, hey, you got this call from such and such, then we have to go in and return the call from Clearwater. Okay. In this September of 1946, or maybe late August, there was Gunflint Trail established a school at Clearwater Lodge that was a one-room school and building owned by Clearwater. Clearwater provided electricity for the building, and let's see, this gives you a good feel for what the inside of the building looked like. Now, the pupils that went there were Paul Jerome and Carl Brandt. Bruce Kerfoot came down for the first year. He boarded with the Boostrums. Nancy stayed with us for the first year because Trout Lake wasn't really inhabitable yet for in the wintertime. Bill and George lined one of our guest cabins, insulated it, and so the Krataskas stayed in that cabin during the wintertime. Nancy went with us to the school. Bill and Art Schleep and George worked for Hester's at a lumber company that was over in between East Bearskin and what a lake called, at that time, was called Suffer, now it's Moon Lake. And right sort of at the end of this railroad, old logging railroad that went over to along East Bearskin and then over to Clearwater.
Bill, where are you and Don Schleep in this picture?
Don is right here.
Looking very cherubic.
Yeah, this is a second year we were there. He's going first grade here, and the second year from 47 to 48. I'm in there. This is Jerry Schleet, and there's Nancy. This is Jim Schleet. These two were from, well, either Swanson's Resort or Golden Eagle, one of the two, as well as this girl was from one of the two. Which ones I can't remember. My mother identified some of these people, not everybody. Now, you can see there was a bookcase there. There were the big library books from the public library down in Grand Marais to make it available for us. This whole long row of windows here gave us a good amount of light itself. We had you ever seen a water dispenser that's fairly huge, maybe several gallons or so, but then you take a paper cup and get the water from it. So, but you had to fill it by bucket by hauling it from the lake. And the school was a single story, naturally. We had the outdoor toilet was put in, and then Boosters had established gardens in several places, and so that provided a couple ball fields for us to use. There's also behind the school was a huge bridge, well, not real huge, but it's big enough, so in the wintertime, we take our toboggan that the school had, and that had two missing slats in it, but it was enough to take the whole school. And so we haul the toboggan up the top of the ridge, and then we just slide down the other side and again and again and again until we got exhausted or hungry or whatever. Okay, by 1950, Bill had built a fifth cabin and also obtained a large gas tank with, they could use, fill propane in it, and then let and lay lines to the various cabins. So the cabins were all furnished with propane also. And with the propane was a big event because that meant they could get rid of the ice house. Didn't have to haul the ice and put it in there anymore. They could have gas refrigerators, big improvement. It's really neat. Let's see. Also, the ice house that they had in Forest Lodge, they converted that into an office building and entertainment center for the guests that come in. Office, a store, they moved their store out of a room in their home and bring it down into this building they called the Huddle. Huddle got its name because a bunch of farmers in Illinois would come into Grand Ridge and you'd go into one of the back rooms, the storerooms, or one of the stores there and gamble. And of course, gambling was not legal in Illinois, but this was just for themselves. So here's Bill once again. I suspect this might be on Mountain Lake also. Okay, next slide. This is my cousin Paul, but that's not a big deal. At the not having flies and mosquitoes and chew me up. By the early 50s, Cook County got the Rural Electrification Association, REA, came into Cook County. Arrowhead Cooperative was established, and Grace Boissenin was elected as a representative from the Gunflint Trail Resort Owners Association to be on the first board, or one of the first boards of the REA, or the Arrowhead Cooperative. And by around 53 or 54, Arrowhead was able to come up the Gunflint Trail, and then we got 110 volt AC for the first time there at the resort. Now with the 110 volt AC coming from Arrowhead, that meant we didn't need to have those 55 volt, 55 2-volt cells cluttering up the resort, so Bill Halton took those out. And then the next step, in this winter of 54, he started excavating underneath our home. Remember, it was built on a hill, and there was a small area underneath there that he stored the 2-volt cells, as well as a workshop and Grace's laundry there. So what he started doing that fall and winter, throughout the winter, was excavate underneath the cabin. To do this, he'd just get a shovel and dig it out. And he would take a section at a time and prop up the building with our home with a cedar log, and then establish the laid concrete blocks to start building the wall around what now became a building. And piece by piece by piece by piece around, he was able to do that. And at the same time, of course, the cabin didn't collapse. Let's see, then the next step that they did was they brought in running water, because they had the 110 volt AC now that they could operate pumps and that sort of thing. And built a shower down in the basement. Of course, the basement was still unheated and all, so it was somewhat of a trial in the wintertime to get out and take a shower. But at least we could take a shower, and wasn't just a tub bath or sink bath or something like that. Another curious thing that happened, this was in the mid-50s also. Bill and would often get together with our sleep and just do what guys would do, talk around, get some coffee. And one of the days, Art was complaining about the fact that guests would, not guests, but people would come up and have their own canoes and this sort of thing, and use the resort there at Clearwater Lodge to launch their canoes, and would not buy anything from our sleep. So he didn't like that at all. And at the same time, that road that went from Clearwater to Forest Lodge, that was a private road that Bill and Grace had to maintain it. They had Bill had gotten a grader that could be towed behind the pickup truck, and Grace would drive the truck. Bill would operate the grader, and the grader had no springs on it, and he just, shake around. And I would haul along behind with a shovel and haul the big rocks off.
Oh,
So, that was not really a satisfactory arrangement for Bill and Grace. So Bill and Art just said, well, you know, we could solve two things at one time. We could create a public landing, and Bill would get the county to come in to take over the maintenance of the road. And so the county accepted finally, and then they, of course, improved the road going between Clearwater and Forest Lodge. But that was how the public landing became established there on Clearwater Lake. Bill provided a 50-foot stretch of lakeshore property for the public landing. And of course, in the fall of summer of '55, I had graduated from Cook County High School and trundled off and started my Navy career. And about the same time, in the early '60s, Bill decided to, instead of having what we called a rural cabins at the time, to update them to provide bathrooms and, well, shower room and a sink and an indoor toilet and all. That proceeded for a couple of years, and things were going along pretty good for him until, well, the mid-60s or so, and Bill's health was getting more and more fragile, and he just couldn't keep up with what he needed to do, and Grace wasn't able to operate the resort on her own. So I was at the postgraduate school at the time, and they wanted to know if I'd like to take over the resort. Well, the Navy has this thing about if you go to a school paid for by the Navy, they expect something in return, which is obligated service for a while. So I was sort of stuck there. So they sold the resort to Ray and Alice Pruitt in November. And they went down to, they had built a small shed, 10 by 20 foot shed on some of the properties that they still maintain or still kept, and use it as a place to store their furniture, and then they would come back. They'd go down to Illinois, spend the winter down there, and then come back up, and they would build their home there, because as far as Bill was concerned, this Cook County was a gift from God, and he was going to stay there as long as he could. But he just never became strong enough that he could come back up. And he died in December of '68. And Grace married a former old friend of Bill and Grace's, Grace Stevens, in 1970. And then Grace and Ray, used that shed, cleared it out a little bit, and they would use it as sort of a glorified tent that they could camp out in during the later parts of July and August. They had Ray put in a sink and put a big barrel up on the tree where they could fill it with water, and then they would have a outdoor shower. There was also a gas refrigerator that had been part of their home when they were still there at the resort, and had that in that little shed also. So that was a fairly neat area, still camped out. Ray and Alice operated the Forest Lodge until about the mid-1970s, when they sold off the cabins and their home to others. Now, many of the current owners had bought their cabins from the Pruitts, and they're still there. Paul and Carol Shaw Tom and Jean Probst, Mary Olson, whose husband Wayne had died sometime in the 90s. Bob and Kay Olson, and of course, Dave and Kathy Coleman. So that's a long and endured, I apologize hope your tails aren't getting too sore.
Hey, Bill, you want to take us through a few more of these pictures?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Okay, this shows the dock at Forest Lodge, the dock, and then the boats were stored over here on this far side. And this is just incidental. And here's our family at Forest Lodge. This is on the deck of our home. Okay, now the outlying boats on, in this case, mountain, in the fall, they would have to go over, Bill and Grace would have to go over to the boat, pull them up out of the water, turn them over for the winter time. This happened to be a picture on Mountain Lake 40,
Wow.
Bill coming back, and of course, this is in the fall, and he's running around with a rifle, hoping maybe he can see some partridge or whatever. Okay. This used to be the way you would go on a portage before the boundary water view area was established. After the boundary water was established, you couldn't have any man-made things out in the wilderness. Now, and so the reason for this canoe rest type of device is you're carrying a canoe across the portage. You have this crossbar here. You can just put the bow of the canoe up there and take a rest a little bit and then go back. And you didn't have to lift the canoe all the way off the ground to get it going. And here at the Watercraft Exhibit Building, you see an actual exhibit of this. And that picture, I think, was taken on the stairway portage and going from Daniels to, Duncan to Rose Lake. And this is my parents at their 25th wedding anniversary. Here's a example of the phone that we had. Crank on the side and then family operator. Okay, next slide. And this is Bill down in the huddle with the stores behind and operating at the office, so to speak. Here they are outside the huddle. This picture shows the inside. Remember I mentioned something about there being an entertainment center, so to speak? Well, Bill got this pool table from down in Illinois, hauled it up and put it in there, and then he got this slot machine also. This happens to be, that's made in 59, and this is my wife, Ilona, and Ozzie Kirsty was the son of one of my dad's friends in Ottawa, Illinois, and Ozzie took my place as a general gopher at the resort.
Last one, last slide.
Last slide? Oh, okay. Our home we had a closed-in porch on the front on the lake side, but while I was growing up, that was all, in the wintertime, that was all closed off, and it would serve as a place to store perishable foods in the wintertime because, it was unheated and kept cool. But then they tore partition off between the main cabin and the porch, and refurnished it, and here he is in his, taking his ease.
Nice.
Let's thank Bill for a wonderful presentation. Here we have time for a couple questions or comments.
I don't know, people probably really sore.
This was great. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Oh, Nancy, would you stand up and wave at people?
Uh-oh, she's taking notes.
Oh, you have any corrections?
Something about in the winter time, skiing.
Oh,
If you weren't able to turn, right,
yes.
you were in big trouble.
Coming down from, well, when they, early in 45, they built a parking area for guests, not by the lake, but up at the top of the little ridge that was right behind us. And the road came up and over that, and then down to our home. And Nancy and I would get our skis and we would come down that hill. And Nancy was talking about, but there was no place to stop, and neither one of us knew how to stop on skis without just falling down. I was bored with Krataskas later on, and Nancy and I, remembering the skis thing here, we decided that we wanted to build a ski hill here at Trout Lake. So we went to the west of the land that the Krataskas had, and was going to build well, Nancy's father said, that's okay, you can cut down some trees, but not along the lake shore. Again, we had this situation where, I don't know if we ever did ski down that thing, but we had this situation that we couldn't stop, there was no place to go. So an alternative to that was, we would go from Trout Lake out east of the resort to the Colville Road is where we pick up the school bus. And as an alternative skiing method, we would ask George to bring along the skis when he came to pick us up from the school bus. And then we would have some rope, and then he would tow us behind the car and get back to and that was great. Yes. And Nancy's father said, hey, that looks like a great amount of fun. So, Charlotte, would you tow me out there? And as they were going along, George kept saying, go a little bit slower, go a little bit slower. And Charlotte said, I'm going as fast, slow as I can, otherwise we're going to stop.
You can, at the Forest Lodge, I guess 3 of the buildings have been torn down and have been replaced with other things, more modern things. The Huddle was torn down a few years ago, but with a building very sympathetic to what the Huddle used to look like. Ours is cabin number 4. The center portion of it, if you look at it real hard, you can see what it was with other pieces that have grown as we've been over the years. Cabin 2.
Which Mary and Wayne Olson had.
And that's pretty much absolutely original to the way it was built at the time, with just a few modern amenities. So if you look, you can see really nice pieces of the fine craftsmanship that went into that, and the many years of blood, sweat, and tears that everybody did. So that's kind of special.
So can I say one thing too? Cabin 1 is still the original cabin.
Cabin.
That's the original wood and everything in cabin 1.
Well, so is what with the 2 and the 3 also, well, there's different numbers now, but, and the Kevin, the one that was built next to the parking lot. That's still there.
By the creek.
By the creek, yes.
And it's partitioned, just like you said.
A nice little addition that matches.
Yeah, it's really.
Let's thank Bill one more time for a tremendous.